What's up, I'm Troubleshoot. Welcome back to a continuation in the Gitea server videos. Essentially, Gitea is a self-hosted GitHub, and of course one of the major features of GitHub is GitHub Actions. You can automate tasks like builds and things like that for CI/CD pipelines, etc., and it's super useful. This feature is actually built into Gitea as Gitea Actions. In this video, I'll show you how to set up your own self-hosted Gitea Actions runner, etc., so you can make your own life a lot easier. Gitea Actions is almost exactly the same as GitHub Actions, and almost anything you can do on one, you can do on the other. It's all about automation. I created the Techno account switcher, a C# and C++ program with a bunch of web stuff, and building it takes a long time. You have to build the client, the server, other services, the installer, etc. And doing this every time I want to release a new build takes 10 to 15 minutes. However, automating it with a workflow makes life infinitely easier, and all of these tasks are done for me automatically, and everything is uploaded at the very end. All I do now is write code, push updates, and everything else is handled for me. In my last video, you learned how to set up your own Gitea server, a private GitHub alternative. This video shows you how to enable actions, set everything up, and create your own. If you're wondering about the differences between GitHub Actions and Gitea Actions, you'll find a comparison page linked down below showing you all of the changes that you may need to worry about if you're migrating from one platform to another. All in all, it's not really that much. They're very similar. But before we begin, this video wasn't sponsored by Gitea. Instead, it's sponsored by Brilliant. Brilliant is a fantastic place to learn new skills through thousands of interactive lessons. Start learning for free using my link, brilliant.org/troubleshoot, but you'll learn more at the end of the video. For now, let's get to action. Gitea Actions works by creating a runner, which is a separate program running either natively or in another Docker container that executes code and builds stuff for us. Keep in mind, this is running code from different repositories on your Gitea server, so only allow runners if you know the code's source and contents. If you're doing this for your own projects, then great. Otherwise, if you've exposed Gitea to the internet, make sure you lock it down to only repos and organizations you trust. So let's begin. First of all, Gitea Actions are enabled by default. If they're not, and you've upgraded from an older version, you'll find out how to do so in the description down below. To set up an act runner, you can use the same or a dedicated machine for better performance. I'll do it on the same machine that hosts my Gitea server for simplicity's sake. The official Gitea documents tell you everything you need to know about setting up the act runner. For now though, I'll scroll down to start the runner using a Docker Compose, so I can just add all of this to our existing Docker Compose YML file. In my previous video, we set this project up in opt-gitea. All we need to do is edit the existing Docker Compose file. So nano docker compose.yml, and we're back to where we were previously. All we need to do is add everything between a runner and the end of this to our existing services list. So we have the Gitea server, scrolling down, the database, and that's it. So at the very end, we'll add the runner here. Now when we start up our project, all three of these things will open up in one go. However, there's a few things that we need to change. So if you wish to run this in the same Docker Compose file instead of a different one, I like to make sure that the database and Gitea are running properly before we actually launch up the runner, so we can add depends on, followed by mentioning the names of our other services, so server as well as db as such. Then under volumes, we previously set a Gitea directory for our server, which was Gitea that points to data inside of our Docker container. For the runner, I'll do something very similar, and I'll point the data folder inside the container to, for example, runner on our system. So the runner directory should host everything from the data folder inside of our runner. Optionally, there's also a config file that's mentioned here, as well as up here. But if you're not going to be messing around with this, you can, if you wish, remove this completely, which I'll be doing here. And finally, you may have noticed that this points to docker.sock, so this runner can actually use our Docker installation running on our host system to spin up new containers and things like that. This, again, is why we need to make sure that we trust the code that our runner is actually using. The only other things that we need to change are the instance URL, registration token, name, and possibly labels if you wish, but I'll be removing this as it's optional. If you scroll down to the bottom to labels, you can learn more about what exactly this is. You can essentially lock down what jobs this runner can run. By default, it's these ones here. But as I don't need to control that on my self-hosted setup, I'll just be removing this line. The Gitea instance URL. this needs to be the URL where your Gitea server is running. For me, it's localhost 3000, but keep in mind, this is how I access it from my desktop on the same computer where this server is running. If you have it exposed over the internet with a URL like techno.co or something like that, then you can use that just fine. But as this is another Docker container running beside these other Docker containers, we'll need to use the container name of our Gitea server. So for me, this is set to Gitea. If you don't have this set, I'd recommend you set a container name just so things don't get confused. We'll scroll down and add our website URL as we usually would. So http://, and now we'll paste in, instead of localhost, the name of our Gitea server container, :3000. And of course, we'll need to make sure that this runner is on the same network as our other Docker containers. This was the Gitea network. So we'll copy and paste networks Gitea as such. Now all of our Docker containers are on the same network, and it should be pointing to the correct place locally. Finally, the Gitea runner registration token. In order to get this linked to our server, we'll need to get a registration token. So log into your Gitea dashboard with an admin account, click your user profile in the top right, followed by choosing site administration. Then in here, under actions on the far left, choose runners, and at the very top right, create new runner. Then copy the registration token using this button here, and we can paste it into the registration token slot right here inside of quotes. Control V to paste, and now we can just save it. That's it. We're practically done with setting this thing up. We can Control S to save, Control X to close, and now we can run docker compose up-d in order to start up our brand new container. It'll be downloaded and started up. At this point, if we refresh the runners page, you should immediately see the name of our runner that we just set up being Gitea runner. That's it. Things are working properly. If you refresh the runners page and you don't see it, make sure it has access. I'd recommend checking the logs of the Gitea runner to see exactly what's going on. For example, mine's running fine here, but yours could be something with a failing connection, etc. At this point, we can actually start to use this thing. So we'll head across to a repository where we want to use this. For example, back to this troubleshoot test repo of mine, and we'll need to head into the settings in the top right of our repo, followed by scrolling down on the repository page until we find Enable Repository Actions. You'll need to make sure that this is enabled for all your repos that should have access to repositories, otherwise things won't work properly. Then we can scroll up and check the Actions page here, where we can find runners that this project can use, as well as secrets and variables if you wish to set any for this particular repo. You can also set these on a user basis, user profile, settings, followed by actions, secrets, and variables here as well. But for now, as things are enabled and we can use them, we'll create a brand new workflow for our project to use. So all we need to do is create a folder and a file. So all I need to do is create a new directory and a workflow file. I've got this repo on my system using GitHub Desktop. So I can open the folder in VS Code, for example, and we can set it all up from here. So next to my existing files, we'll make a new directory or folder, and we'll call it .gitea. Similar to how GitHub uses .github, this is .gitea. Then inside of here, we'll make a new folder or directory called workflows, as such, one word, and finally we can create a new YAML file of whatever name you wish, for example, test.yml. Now inside of here, we can tell our server exactly what to do and when for this particular workflow that we're creating. You'll find an example of a workflow on the Quick Start page under Actions all the way down here. We'll copy this and paste it into our YAML file. Essentially, this action runs every time we push to our repo, and it'll echo out some text, such as the event name, the runner's operating system, info about our branch. Then it'll clone the actual repo, tell us about the files inside of it, and say it's done. Pretty cool. We'll save this file, and now all we need to do is push this to our repo to see what happens. So we'll git commit and push it. I'll say workflow, commit to main, and push. Now when it arrives on our Gitea server, you should see things change on the actions page. So for example, there's a one here. We'll click it, check out the workflow, and inside of it, you can see things are busy setting up. Things are downloading on our Docker system. This could take some time, especially the first time around. Then shortly after, it'll run the actual steps of the workflow. So clean up, start up, and eventually things should work really quickly and be happy. So it echoed everything as we expected, checked out the repository, then tells us about the repository, as well as a list of files in the repo, and tells us that it's a success. That's it. There's one last thing to touch on, and that's the fact that emojis inside of a workflow may make your system unhappy if you're using a default MySQL database. I don't have this issue, and you likely won't either if you followed my guide, as we're using Postgres instead of MySQL. There are steps to prepare, which you'll find linked over here on the Gitea Usage Actions Quick Start page. Now that we've done all of that, let's do something actually useful. What I'll do is take my code behind hub.techno.co, my articles website, and I'll basically get it to work the same way it does with my other CI/CD workflow, where it takes all of these markdown files and makes them into a pretty website. The thing that I use is called Hugo, and currently it's set up to build manually by running a couple of different commands to compress images and then pump out a bunch of files into the public folder that's then mounted and copied and moved around on my website server. Let's get a workflow to actually build our website using this command, so I don't need to run this build.sh file manually every time I update my website. So in order to begin, again, we'll need to create a workflow folder and the workflow file. So I've cloned this into my GitHub desktop. We'll open the repository in Visual Studio Code. Then we'll need to start by creating a new directory called .git. Then inside of here, a new folder called workflows. And inside of here, a new file called, let's say, pipeline.yml. Inside of here, we can start coding our builder. You can do this easily by adapting the example code, which I'll do here. So I'll copy this and we'll paste it in. So we are building our website. It's building our website, and it'll build every time we push. I'll call this builder, and it runs on Ubuntu latest. That's pretty good. Just keep in mind, if you want to run any custom images, you'll need to whitelist it in the runner. So if I head across to my Gitea website, check the site administration settings, followed by actions and runners, you'll see that the Gitea runner is currently only allowed to use Ubuntu latest 22.04 and 20.04. If we try and put something else in there, such as, I don't know, Hugo, or something like that, it's not going to work, simply because the builder only works with whitelisted Docker images. So if we wanted to add something, for example, PyTorch, we'd need to whitelist it. To do so, we'll need to generate and use a configuration file for our runner. Now, I know I previously stepped over this. You don't really need the config file, but if you're going to be doing something custom like this, you'll need one. To create the configuration file, checking back to Usage Actions Act Runner all the way down to configuration, you'll see that we need to run this command in order to generate the configuration file. So I'll copy this and we'll paste it into our server. This config.yaml file is just a bit confusing as to what it's exactly configuring, so I'll say runner config, just so we know exactly what this file is. Now it's created a new file called runner config, and if we check what's inside of it, we can see a bunch of configuration like this. If we scroll down, we'll eventually see labels over here where we can add support for custom labels and different images. To do so, I'll make a new line, and inside of quotes, we'll be laying it out in a specific format. This specific format is the image label, so whatever we'll be calling it, say Ubuntu 22.04 or PyTorch, where it's going to, for example, Docker, followed by the repository and image, and possibly tag. So for example, PyTorch, latest, for example. This should simply match whatever you're trying to run. Then, if we were to save this file and close it, we need to tell our runner to actually use it. So we'll change our Docker compose file, and all the way down by runner, we'll add the line config file, config.yml, and mount it over here. So we've pointed the configuration file that we told it to read to the file that we've got set up on our system. Once we've set this environment variable and this volume variable, we can save it, close it, so Ctrl+S, Ctrl+X, and we can restart just the runner. Docker compose down runner to stop just the runner, and Docker compose up runner -d to start just the runner. Now, if we check out our runners page and refresh it, now you should see PyTorch is here. And if we tried to run PyTorch in our job, things are going to work properly. Just keep in mind that we can give any nickname to it in this first section here, and that's what we'll be referring to it as. So if it's PyTorch and the image name is, say, test, So it's in the PyTorch repo as test. We'll need to have it named, say, PyTorch-test, as we can't have forward slashes in this first bit. Anyways, we'll be running this on just Ubuntu latest, and in order to get my project building with Hugo, we'll need to install it. So for this, I'll check the documentation. Installing on Linux under Debian simply requires us to run apt install. So we'll do exactly that. We'll apt install Hugo. Just keep in mind Docker containers don't have sudo, so it runs on Ubuntu latest, and the steps start with updating apt-get, for example, where we'll run the command apt-get update, and we'll need to include -y to make sure that any interactive prompts are skipped. Then we'll actually install Hugo, so name install Hugo, and the command is run apt-get install Hugo space -y. Now we can get to running the rest of our script. So first of all, it'll need to clone our repository, which uses actions checkout v4, same as the example. And now we can start actually building it. So to build the website, I'll copy and paste the same command we use here in my build script. So we can paste it in, and now it should be built to the public folder. However, the public folder currently doesn't exist. So we'll make the folder in a new line just before it as such. And we'll also need to create the cache folder, which is mentioned over here. Now that things should be building properly, how exactly do we get the files that it pumps out? Well, when this pipeline is run, a container is created running Ubuntu, updates, installs, and builds the website, but it's immediately deleted afterwards. In order to get something out of this, we'll need to create an artifact, make a release, or upload to an FTP, something like that. As an example, I'll create a brand new release with the public folder just zipped up. So we'll say tar the public folder, and it simply just runs this command to create a tarball of it. Now, in order to actually get the file from it, we'll add it to the releases. For this, I've checked the git.com/actions page, and a good option seems to be git release action. So clicking this, we can simply copy this as an outline and use it. So I'll do exactly that. We'll paste it in here, make sure it's set up properly, spaced properly, we don't need this, and it needs to release just this file here. So that's what I'll tell it to do. I can now save this, and we should be able to run it. So I'll simply push this, for example, create pipeline, commit, and push, and now checking out the repo on Gitea, we should shortly after see a file update, a new action pop up, and checking out the actual action, it should start by preparing the environment, preparing to check out, as it hasn't done that before, start by updating apt-get, which allows us to install Hugo in a moment. If you try and install something in a Docker container without first updating apt-get, you'll usually see that there's a bunch of errors, so it's a good idea to always do that first. This could take some time, so there we go, it's installing Hugo. Then it should very quickly clone the repo, and unfortunately, it can't resolve Gitea. Why is this? Well, if we quickly pull across Docker Desktop, you'll see that our Gitea server, so the database, website, and the runner are all running inside of a Docker Compose, while this action is running in a separate container. This container doesn't have access to the same network over here. In order to allow access, we'll need to do two things. First of all, in our Docker Compose file, we'll need to make sure that the network Gitea is set to external true, so other containers running on our system can access this internal network. Once we've done this modification, Control-S and Control-X to save it and close it, we can now edit the runner config file and tell it to put the container on that network. So scrolling down here, we'll pass runner, then cache, and finally container. Here we can set a network. It can be host, bridge, or the name of a custom network. We did set up a custom network called Gitea, so I'll add it here, Gitea, save, Control-S, Control-X to close, and now we can restart just the runner. Again, so Docker Compose down runner and Docker Compose up runner -d. With that runner restarted, we should now be able to scroll up and rerun all jobs to see if it works properly. Again, it's going to take some time to run through it again, but I'll skip forward in time. And there we go. This time it worked properly, so it cloned the repo, created the directories, built the website using Hugo, which is super fast, put it into a tarball, released it, and it should now be visible here. So let's go ahead and double check that. Scrolling up to the top, you should now see a releases tab, and on this tab, main, Ghost committed this to release, including public tar.gz. If we choose to download this and save it, it could take some time, but when it's done, opening this, we have the public folder with a bunch of stuff inside of it. This is my website compiled. Let's extract this to a test folder as such, And when it's done, we should now be able to simply just open up the index, and there you go. There's my website, pretty much ready to start use online. Obviously, the embed isn't really working and things like that, as it's running from my local file system, but on a web server it should work just fine. At this point, I can upload these files and bam, my website's updated. But of course, that's sort of the thing you'd want to automate. So instead of pushing to releases, it should connect to an FTP server and upload the files. You can check settings followed by actions, secrets, and set your FTP password and URL here, etc., and so on and so forth. Having runners is super useful. So congratulations, you've now set up your Gitea Actions runner and learned about a simple CI/CD through an example of creating an action. You found this interesting, and if you're interested in learning new skills, then this video sponsor is for you. Brilliant. Learning through interaction like you did with this video is exactly what Brilliant is about. Brilliant focuses on making learning fun through interactive lessons. It's where you can learn by doing, with thousands of lessons on math, data analysis, AI, programming. You can learn tons. Each lesson is filled to the brim with hands-on problem solving, as playing around with problems is proven to be 6 times more effective than learning through watching lectures. The lessons on Brilliant are created by award-winning teachers, researchers, and professionals from the likes of MIT, Google, Caltech, Microsoft, and more. Building critical thinking skills makes you become a better thinker. You've now expanded your private GitHub-like Gitea server with actions, learned about workflows, and even more. So you're likely interested in coding. To sharpen your skills further, check out Brilliant's creative coding course. In it, you'll get familiar with Python, learning the essentials from loops and variables to nesting, control flow, randomness, and more. All of this to help further develop your mind to think like a professional programmer. All it takes is having a little bit of fun with Brilliant through your phone or computer for something as simple as 10 minutes a day. Now that's productive. Try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/troubleshoot. Link on screen and in the description down below. On top of this, you'll also get 20% off your premium annual subscription. Hopefully you found this video interesting, if not super useful. This took tons of effort to set up, but once it's done, it's done. I struggled for a bit, I'm sure you will too, but it's all worth it. All of these seconds and minutes add up to a huge amount of time you can save just by not doing the same repetitive tasks over and over again. Getting things to run programmatically with a bit of thinking and pre-planning helps a lot. A little investment for a constantly growing reward is definitely worth it. But anyways, that's it. Thank you all for watching this video. My name's been Troubleshoot, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.